discussion, We Begin at the End by Chris Whitaker. The book is about bonds in several dimensions, the bonds between humans, the bonds between humans and institutions. Across the board, it's a mesh of relationships that weed through the book and end up in a murder mystery and a criminal mystery and a court mystery and a lot of stuff that maybe on first sight could be interpreted as flashy, Hollywoody, but I think in the end have some depth to it. So this is a novel I recommend reading because it's very entertaining. You could watch a movie about this, but it also gives you a little bit of strength to transcend and feel about the bonds that are described in the book. And that is the strength that this novel gives to me. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's December 15th, 2022. This is Krim Delko. For the day, the fund is down 10 basis points. The market's down 2.8%. For the year, we are down 63.5%. The market's down 18%. We're underperforming by 45.5%. Book discussion, We Begin at the End by Chris Whitaker. For new listeners, why are we doing book discussions in a podcast with the mission of giving people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund? Well, because reading is conditioning of the mind. Reading is not just the pastime of hedge fund managers. It's part of the routine. It's part of the job because we're in the knowledge business and we use literature as conditioning of the mind. Now, this book is, I would say, it's on the lighter side of literature. So it's not a John Steinbeck novel or something like that. It's a narrative. It's a good story. It's interesting. It's mysterious. There's a mystery behind this. So this is a sort of a Hollywood type book where you end up wondering what happened. And of course, I'm not going to give away the plot, but what's really interesting in this book is the relationships in the book. I think everything is sort of woven through the lens of bonds and the relationships. So there is parenthood, there is siblings, there is the relationship between people and the law, there is the relationship between the police and the law and the people and the police and the father and the daughter and the daughter and the brother and a wife and father. So it is every character in this book is characterized by their relationship to other people. So in a sense, this is kind of almost like a graph, in computer science, where we have nodes and the edges. So we have the actual person, and then all the vectors that show from the person towards, let's say, other people or towards institutions and how they relate to each other. So in that sense, this novel was written, I don't know if this was intentional. I don't know the author at all. I haven't listened to any interviews or read anything about it. I picked up the book. It's one of those random pickups. And by the way, just tangentially, I want to talk a little bit about how I actually pick books, which is something I've never discussed before. But let's get back to this novel. So this is like a graph description of a plot. So you could look at this plot as a sort of narrative. This happens and then that happens. Or you could look at this from a graph network perspective, where you look at the nodes and the relationships. And that's pretty interesting, I think. You could look at actually any book like that. Of course, you could read Anna Karenina and look at it from a graph network perspective. But this book particularly emphasizes that. And I think that's really powerful because it makes you think, of course, and this is, like I said, the ultimate motivation of writing about or reading, novels is always to, I think, try to sort of in-depth understand stuff and reveal stuff and rethink life, rethink stuff that is relevant to me right now as a person, as a hedge fund manager. This is really, it's conditioning of the mind. It's like when I go to the gym to do push-ups or chin-ups, what do? I condition my muscles relative to my actual training, which is, let's say I surf, I box, These are my two main sports. So I condition my muscles relative to those endeavors. And in this particular case, I read a book and I kind of relativize it towards what is relevant to me right now in life, which is my relationship with my family, my relationship with my business and my customers, and so on and so forth. So again, this is a very interesting book from a sort of graph network perspective. It's written in that way. So every character is characterized by its first, it's described like every other book. It has a good sort of narrative description of who is this person, and then there's the sort of the edges, which is the relationships of that particular person with other people and with, well, let's say with institutions such as the police, the law, prison, incarceration, wardens. Like there's a lot of stuff there. Again, this could be a Hollywood script. I think this book probably will be made into a movie. It's that kind of book. It lacks a little bit of the depth of a Cormac McCarthy, for example, which there's not enough, I would say, meat around the bone when it comes to language and depth and real understanding of life. If there's no God, then all that's left is me, that kind of thing. Or we play games for the win. The win is what matters, like that kind of stuff that Cormac McCarthy is so good at. I would say McCarthy is like I said in my previous discussion of the Blood Meridian, the book that I discussed before this one. That Cormac McCarthy to me is like a Tool song. It's this beautiful melody on top of really harsh tones, harsh bass, harsh rhythms, harsh guitar riffs, that kind of thing. Let's get back to Chris Whitaker again. We begin at the end. I recommend the book. It's a very entertaining book. It describes relationships. It puts people in perspective of their relationships. And, that opens up a lot of possibilities. If you look at the book from a graph network perspective, it's like a social network or anything in life. Like in computer science, when we do, AI is fundamentally driven by graph networks and graph processing. And a lot of intelligence can be gained by representing data structures in graph network terms. And why is that? Because it's very powerful. You can have, let's say, person A going through life doing X, doing Y, doing Z, or you could define person A as in relationship to other people in certain ways. And then you can learn from that. You can learn from those interactions about the person. You can predict what the person is going to do. This is the powerful thing. This is why it's so important for AI. Like I said before I end this episode, I want to talk a little bit about how I actually pick books. One of the big things in writing is always, well, one is the story. Okay, pick the story. It applies to writing as much as reading. What is it actually I'm going to pick to read? Or how am I going to spend my time in terms of reading, for example? In other words, what book am I going to pick? Now, I have a process which is, it's not random. I don't walk into a bookstore and randomly pick a book. But I do like to browse bookstores. So this is one of the things I do. I like to browse physical bookstores. And thank God I live in an area here, and I don't know if that applies to other areas in the world, but here in Silicon Valley, there is enough bookstores still around that allow me to do that. And I usually browse the fiction, nonfiction, hardcover, and paperback sections. The difference between hardcover and paperback is that the hardcover is the newly released stuff and the paperback is the older stuff. I do look at the new stuff. So I just browse and I sort of take notes. I do judge books by their cover. I'm very hardcore about that. So to me, there's nothing wrong with judging books by their cover because it does reveal a lot about the author, about the story, and so on and so forth. So I take notes and then I put sort of a list. I have a list on Amazon and I have a list on Audible, which is Amazon too. Meaning the Amazon book section and the Audible section, where I have a wish list, which is basically kind of my to-do, to read. That's the stuff I'm interested in, type of stuff. But here's what I don't do. I don't go on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter or any other social network. I think that's a waste of time because there's a way too much dirt to dig to find the occasional gold nuggets. I'm not interested in that. But what I do is I am on YouTube quite a bit. I look at YouTube videos and I listen to people like Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman. Those are two of my podcasts. I have a lot of podcasts that I listen to, by the way. I'm a big podcast listener. Some of my favorite podcasts are, again, Lex Friedman. I don't listen to Joe Rogan that much on a podcast. Joe Rogan to me is more of an entertainment evening type of stuff. Like instead of Netflix, I'll just watch an interview. So that kind of thing. But, sometimes there's interesting book recommendations also coming from there. Other interesting podcasts is Mindscape by Sean Carroll. I like Brian Keaton's Into the Impossible podcast, very scientific, but also he just had, for example, Jay Bhattacharya on, which was very political and very revealing and scary, to be honest. I'm probably going to do a reaction podcast on that one. So there's other podcasts. I don't want to, there's some technical stuff like Data Skeptic, where it's more about things like computer science, business, data science, and sort of those tangents which we as investors in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices, of course, care about. So to summarize the book, now back to the book here and the discussion. We Begin at the End by Chris Whitaker. It's a book that it really reminds me of a graph network. It's about relationships, it's about bonds, it's about the strength of those bonds and the weakness and what people do to strengthen certain bonds, or what they do because they're obliged to do things just because they're bonded to other people or other institutions. This is the gist of this book. A very interesting book, an entertaining book. It's a mystery also. It's a Hollywood type book, but again, fundamentally, what's really interesting here is that for the first time, I am looking at a book sort of from a graph network perspective, which is kind of an interesting way to represent anything, data, narratives, and let's say, for example, in this case, a novel. Thank you.